Literature abounds on leadership during crisis. Authors frequently refer to wartime leaders for advice. So whether we seek the learnings from Churchill during World War II or Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a few common themes emerge. During a crisis, leaders should be driven by facts, not preconceptions, by the larger good, not by pride. They should keep strong if possible and, in any case, keep cool. At Derwent, we were curious to investigate the impact of COVID-19 on business leaders from Australia's industrial sector. How has this crisis challenged their leadership? What did they learn about the leadership capabilities of their team as they navigated those critical early days of this crisis? I'm Helen Hall, and joining me are my colleagues Olivia Rathgaber and Mike O'Sullivan. Together, we're going to take you through an insightful discussion on our learnings as to whether crisis makes better leaders. Olivia, can I ask you to give us a brief overview of the research you've led and if you broadly outline what it revealed?
This has been a really revealing initiative, Helen. The combined economic risk and health crisis together was presenting leaders with a unique and fast-moving set of professional and personal obligations. So we've had full lockdowns at various points, which brought substantial physical and financial adjustments. And we anticipated, as we saw with the GFC and earlier crises, that despite the devastating impacts of something like novel coronavirus, out of these challenges, fantastic new leadership capabilities would emerge. We wanted to test that anecdotal evidence we had with a small initiative specific to Derwent's industrial practice. So the goal was to obtain actionable evidence about differentiating leadership capabilities.
That sounds really relevant, Olivia, to the current focus on bringing practical insights through data.
Yes, that's very true, really true. It was important to us that it was not just commentary, Helen. We conducted one-on-one interviews with a range of CEOs and we asked them to hold the mirror up on their own leadership. And it was a really, really good self-reflection exercise for them to find out what has it taken for me to lead well during COVID-19 and how do you use this experience to build resilience?
So tell me, how did our anticipated outcomes fare against the actual outcomes?
Well, we anticipated 4 key themes, and this research confirmed 2 of those as top of the list. Maybe, Mike, you'd like to introduce some of the findings here.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Helen. Love to. Look, what we found was really telling. Firstly, planning, specifically effective decision-making amidst uncertainty. And secondly, enhanced communication capability during a period of almost zero face time. Ultimately, we found that the best leaders are great at communicating and executing a plan with both competence and concern. So we want to take this to our clients to support them actively to apply these learnings so that they are best prepared to climb out, or as it may be, go back in during ensuing phases of the economic and health crisis.
Well, that's certainly relevant to Victoria today, Mike, and possibly, hopefully not, but possibly to other regions very soon. Helen, does that set up a little bit about a purpose? Maybe we can explore the details of each part a little bit more specifically.
Absolutely. So let's dive deeper into what this research piece presented in relation to planning. Decision-making amid ambiguity, the absolute number and pace of decisions, and perhaps more importantly, what Australia's industrial leaders learned about themselves and their teams. Olivia, can I ask you to jump back in here?
Sure. It's truly mind-boggling just how much has been going on at once for leaders. In a setting where planning is so challenged by a lack of precedent, shortage of data, our research showed that the extent to which an executive can step up versus cannot step up or really has difficulty stepping up was about their own effective planning. So to take a position, to have a plan, explain the plan, and then make effective decisions. And it showed that those who are explicit to share the plan really do take anxiety out of it for others. When people know you have it in hand, then your teams will get on board.
Look, I found that also in my conversations, Olivia, and there was one comment that really resonated with me from one of our participants. He spoke about planning ahead of time really counts. It was hard in the first few weeks given uncertainty, but we demonstrated that we were ahead of the game. Helen, I think we all felt this pretty keenly, even our own internal experiences within our firm, this sense of feeling reassured by a good plan. It has a very personal impact.
Absolutely agree. But this was different given the pressure and pace of decision making. It was like we were all staring down the marathon, knowing that we had to keep sprint pace. What did the research tell us about how leaders managed the pressure of the pace?
Well, I might comment on that one. Our conversation suggested that when it comes to implementing change, we can actually get in our own way quite a bit. So it was interesting when one of our participants, if I recall correctly, explained some of the benefits of crisis pressure in his own business, saying along the lines of, I've learnt, very quickly that the team and I are able to implement change much faster than we had previously. And we realised that typical self-imposed barriers can impact the speed of change. So for me, that raises questions about, how do we replicate or simulate some of the sense of urgency that you get in a crisis? Because if we think about that crisis situation, it's really essential to adapt quickly. And, it's reminding me of one of my clients who was successful in converting 2,000 odd people from a corporate head office to working from home in the space of only about a fortnight. And they noted on reflection that in BAU, they estimated that project would take them about 18 months. So I think that's a huge contrast, and it's quite amazing human effort. But I think how we use that impetus in crisis to find the energy, the motivation, and the agility to execute at pace and translate that to a normal setting is quite a challenge for leaders, particularly when they're working without a crisis environment to spur them on.
So tell me, how can we take all of the positive executive growth, all the personal best from the core of the crisis and implant into the business as usual organisation? Do you think that's even possible?
Concept of crisis makes leaders. It's underestimated, I think, even by those we interviewed. More than half those we surveyed noted their recent or previous crisis management experience really set them up for success. So they described that when they were able to generalise previous experience to support their COVID response, it really helped. In this sense, none of the conditions were the same, but how they might have led through a major event previously, such as a client fraud, the GFC, or a massive emergency in a mine, all gave them some experience on which to base their current actions. And one of them, after considering his own performance over 3 crisis periods, said, I think I perform best in a crisis because I have to make decisions far more efficiently than I would in BAU.
Olivia, I've got something to add here, and we've talked about this offline as a threesome, but for the benefit of our audience, I think this leads us to consider the value of self-reflection. The leaders we spoke to had quite honestly not had the time to reflect. This was, quite, revelatory for me. They loved the opportunity to sit back and to do this, especially with an independent party. And it surprised me how few hadn't done this autonomously. They know all these things about themselves, but they don't often bring them to a conversation in a structured way. I think it showed them a few things about their own capability that they may not have considered. And I think we should all use this material, and sooner than later, given our current environment.
Mike, I heard you outline the requirement for enhanced communication capability by leaders during what was a period of almost zero face time. Can I ask you to take us through some of the findings on communication and what was reflected in the conversations we had with business leaders?
Love to. I found communication as a theme really fascinating and again, quite insightful piece of this research. Communication was, without fail, acknowledged as critical. That is obvious and perhaps logical, but It was about so much more than just getting one's message across. There were simple but powerful lessons. There's no such thing as over-communicating. Speak the truth. Communicate early and frequently. There was direct evidence that these elements were all powerful in reassuring employees, but there were also reflections to say that a high frequency of communication implicitly showed concern. This was probably the surprising piece. Many leaders received this feedback directly from the shop floor, and it was reassuring for them as leaders. A second key theme was authenticity, evidenced by communication being laced with humanity, signalling personal vulnerability, or communication that showed concern for the common good. One executive I spoke to was emphatic in articulating how his business absolutely did not want to be the one who introduced COVID into a remote Aboriginal community. This was a palpable driver and mobiliser of their activity subsequently, and became a cause to rally around beyond self-interest. Humanity and authenticity also manifested itself in other ways. We can all relate to this one. You know, the sheer naked exposure of working in one's pyjamas, business up top, pleasure down below, all those things, and or working amongst family and pets. This brought teams and customers together, I think, and a really strong reinforcement of the need for leaders to sometimes pare things back. And finally, one interesting piece for me was that leaders were induced to embrace their own licence to communicate. Things were moving fast. Leaders and employees were forced to back themselves, and there was huge power derived from this. If I think about this whole communication theme, I think these findings pose some really interesting questions for when we think about leadership talent. Is the art of communication as prominent as it should be within the development plans of key executives or within assessment frameworks? How do leaders ensure that they retain moments of authenticity in status quo leadership that will resonate with employees?
COVID-19 has certainly been a very levelling experience for all organisations and leaders. Tell me, was there anything this research piece revealed that surprised us?
Absolutely. We were really surprised to hear our executives talk about the positive impacts on company culture.
Well, that's interesting.
It really was quite extraordinary, Helen. And I think largely due to how leaders made effective plans and communicated them in a way that truly empowered their teams. You know, high-touch video conferencing systems created audio-visual connections through all levels of the business, which we've all felt, and it was a great leveller for teams. And it suggests that this digital workforce really dismantled hierarchy, and in a good way. For groups that defined they had performed in that they were safe, productive, profitable and efficient, the organisational values that they had defined consistently drove the right behaviours. That strong sense that organisational resilience comes from planning who you want in your business, what type of leadership you want to see, especially one that empowers your people to really engage them and bring about genuine collective effort. And nothing was more salient than when the role of the office was up in the air, especially that notion that productivity is a result of, direct supervision. The culture of a business, a positive cultural definition relies on trust in others to bring what they are good at.
So it would seem that cultures with strong values attract leaders with higher concern, which in turn drove better outcomes through the crisis, given the natural inclination for those leaders to genuinely check in on their people. Mike, how did this manifest in the communications findings?
Look, yeah, there were some really interesting statements said, and I don't have time to quote them all, but one that resonated with me, a CEO we spoke with referenced one of his company beliefs. We believe in the connection between our people and our customers. That statement to me is powerful. It shows you trust people and that there is something really reciprocal between your organisation and its external stakeholders. There is a whole lot of quality to control there, but that's a sign of great leadership.
I think we can see that knowing who you are as a leader takes considerable effort but has a high return. What have you heard about this in our discussions?
Well, I think this exercise has increased our awareness of the importance of the executive coaching function. It introduces self-reflection as standard practice for executives and puts systems in place for CEOs to regularly review. In fact, one of the executives I spoke with said that not taking the time to reflect had, in fact, been one of the issues that the crisis had posed. All of our contributors said they would go away and find opportunities to reflect like this more often.
I think it also comes back to that element of, competence and concern that Mike mentioned earlier, communicating a plan with both. That was a really resounding capability to look for in a successful crisis leader. And if I think about our work, that relies on assessing both personal attributes and previous experience. We will look for both in equal measure in assessment frameworks, and it points to the fact that great leaders start from experience. They don't start from scratch. And I think adaptability is demonstrated by effective behaviour change, but that has to be in response to a specific challenge. And you can't really test resilience if you haven't faced into something difficult. So for me, if I look at both of those things, this project has reinforced that experience-based assessment frameworks enable organisations to regularly review how individual leaders grow through specific experiences. And in this sense, leaders must have up-to-date self-knowledge, and that's what makes them a great leader.
So 8 weeks ago, we set up this research project to look at what we thought would be post-analysis of the early days of the COVID-19 crisis in order to find out what could be taken forward as organisations look to climb out of the crisis. It would seem the depth of learning for executives and the positive impact on both people and culture were actually at the height of the crisis. So we're encouraging executives to capture and to continue to self-reflect on and develop their planning and communication skills as they would for during a crisis as opposed to business as usual. Mike and Olivia, thank you. A great discussion. And thanks to our listeners. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, and we encourage you to give us your feedback on your experience of leading through this current COVID-19 crisis. Use the comment section on the socials or jump onto the Derwent website where you'll find our email and contact details. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks and bye for now.